So we're going to start. We have, just a little bit of time together till 12:15. And this, in case you didn't know, is an interactive workshop. So if you are not able to engage with your video or your mic, you want to rethink participating in today's workshop, because it's really difficult to develop a practice and be in community together when we're just seeing names. So this is really an engaged workshop. It's not a lecture. Sorry, if you thought you were joining a workshop that was going to mostly be lecture, that's not this one. So I just want to share that and offer you the opportunity to depart or stay, depending on your technology availability, to share video and share mic and potentially participate in the chat. But I'm not going to over rely on the chat today because of the size of our group. We're 14 people chose to show up this morning on Zoom in a flex workshop to engage in a dynamic and creative and personal and professional topic related to communities in practice will soar. So this will be an opportunity to engage and unmute and talk to us, talk to each other, talk to your colleagues. Anyone here who's faculty or instructional faculty or faculty or facilitate meetings knows what it's like when you're talking to boxes. How many feel seen and heard when you're talking to each other in boxes? You can use your emojis, emoticons, unmute. Do you feel seen and heard in your class or in your meetings or in your workshops when you are the only one with maybe 3 others on the screen? Yeah, it doesn't feed the energy. Yeah, thumbs down. I love that, Andrea. It doesn't feed the spirit of the topic. And so again, please think about your participation this morning. And it's just a short time together. We really don't. Hello, there's Alejandro. And I see a picture of Janine Mulhern. Janine, are you there? Yes.
It's Jeanette.
Jeanette. Oh, I'm so sorry. The J threw me off when I realized maybe I pronounced it wrong. Jeanette and Oscar's here. And we're going to do introductions, but am I pronouncing this right? Hongku Yoon. Hengku.
Yeah.
Thank you. Hengku Yoon. And Sunny is here. And Alex and Jorge. Alejandro, if I didn't say your name, I'll say it again. So thank you, welcome. And because this is a small group, 13 of us, we can have a more engaged, intimate conversation about this really important topic and how we want to shape and inform a community in practice that will soar. And so I'm going to welcome us into this space by starting with sharing my screen and opening with a land acknowledgement. There's Jeanette. And again, please engage as you can, video, unmute. I know you can go off video if you need to, if you've got to take a bite of something to eat, etc. Take a break, but please join us in your fullest possible self this morning while we're together. And I know there's also technical difficulties. Come in and out as you please. Again, video on, video off as you need. Use the chat, but this is intended for us to engage in some dialogue and conversation and sharing. And so in honor to do that, it is also important for me to officially begin our workshop with sharing my screen and situating us here this morning. Thank you again for choosing to be in community in this session. I'm going to have to go back and forth with this format, so I hope this format works well for you, because our notes are here, my notes are here, etc. But let us ground ourselves this morning by starting with a land acknowledgement. And you are familiar with this, you've seen this before. I would like to invite 3 volunteers, 1 each, to read a sentence here of our land acknowledgement. May I see 3 volunteers who'd like to show a thumbs up or hand wave? Okay, thank you, Gail. If you could read the first sentence, then a second volunteer. Sabrina, read the second sentence, then a third volunteer to read the third sentence. Anyone?
I'll do the third sentence.
Thank you, Alex. Okay, great. We'll begin when you're ready.
We pause to acknowledge that Cosumnes River College sits on the land of Miwok and Nisenan people.
We remember their continued connection to this region and give thanks to them.
We offer our respect to their elders and to all Miwok and Nisenan people of the past and present.
Thank you so much for bringing us into the virtual space and the Zoom room with our land acknowledgement. Next, I just want to go over the working agenda for today. And I shared a little housekeeping about how we want to show up today and take care of yourself again, on, off screen, mute, unmute, chat, no chat, step out, step back, whatever, step in, whatever makes most sense for you to participate. But this will be our working agenda. I'm going to do our very best to get through most of this, if not all of it, by 12:15. And if I am unable to get through it, we will also offer a follow-up, and I'll send an invitation to each of you. And so also, before I forget, I'm going to pause a moment to take a screenshot here so I can also get who showed up, so I can follow up with each of you with the materials and resources. Is that okay? All right, on 3, 1, 2, 3, and we'll say CRC. 1, 2, 3.
CRC.
All right, thank you all. That helps me capture who's here and good for my memory as well. So like I said, we'll do our best to move through this by 12:15. We have some unlearning goals, some working communication agreements, the definition of what communities in practice will SOAR is, in addition, some additional social justice definitions. And then we're gonna move into understanding the matrix of oppression, different forms of oppression, how to interrupt them, what are some strategies to interrupt oppressive comments, or when oppression shows up, we will hopefully have time to take on a case scenario, and then step through the working definition of what is an ally, how to become an ally, allyship versus solidarity, what are the differences, and then share some closing resources. How does that sound? Are you with me? All right, it's great to see your faces and movement. We're not just frozen images in these boxes, so thank you for engaging so far. All right, so here are some unlearning goals. Now, why am I calling them unlearning? Why might you think I'm calling them unlearning?
I'll go.
Yeah, Alex.
I think because sometimes we learn certain behaviors that we just accept as normative behaviors, but there certainly is a space to sort of critically think about what we do and what we say. So maybe we should unlearn some of the things that we normalize that might be painful to others.
That's right. Yeah, spot on, Alex. This is an opportunity to unlearn some ways in which we've been conditioned by different systems. And it's also a way for us to, relearn, reimagine, or unlearn and learn new ideas, concepts, and ways of being. So I'm going to come back to the slides, but this is just in general the working goals for this time together. May I ask for 4 volunteers in any order to each read a bullet? Just feel free to unmute. We'll read. Who would like to read the first bullet? Maybe someone who hasn't read before. Alejandro, thanks.
To create brief spaces for dialogue.
To unpack social justice concepts in community.
Thank you, James, for pausing right there on cue. I'm so sorry. Sensitive mouse here. Yes, could you please repeat it again?
To unpack social justice concepts in community.
Thank you. I have a sensitive mouse over here. I'm going to not touch it while people are reading. Thank you. The third one.
To deepen our understanding of inclusion and equity.
Yes, and thank you. I'll add to that understanding of forms of oppression. So the description is both. I just forgot to insert that terminology there, and I'll make that update here. It's to deepen our understanding of inclusion and equity and forms of oppression. And then the last one, please.
To take action in creating a more welcoming and inclusive environment for all.
Yes, thank you. And also to correlate with our workshop title, it's also a just environment for all. Thank you so much for reading these. I'm going to pause here and take us off screen and bring us back, and I'll come back to the working agreements, or excuse me, we'll advance one more to the working agreements for communication, and then I'll go off screen, off share screen. For new volunteers to share community agreements that we want to practice here today in our time together. And if you've already read, you're welcome to take another shot at volunteering to read a communication agreement.
Show up.
Yes, be present, show up. Thank you.
Pay attention to what has heart and meaning for you.
Thank you.
Speak your truth.
Thank you.
Be open to outcome, not attached.
All right. Any questions about what these communication agreements mean? Any clarification or thoughts about any of these items? You may have seen them before.
Can you
other places.
elaborate a little bit more about second one?
Yes, sure. Pay attention to what has heart and meaning for you. So in conversation or dialogue, there might be something that you want to share or that is important to you, that you know that there is space for you to share it. And there could also be something really weighing on you that you feel, I feel maybe nervous to share for fear of judgment or making a mistake in public. That's also valuable and important and has heart and meaning, especially if you start to feel yourself. I'm going to change my lighting here. If you start to feel yourself getting a little bit like, oh, you know, kind of that butterfly feeling, or that like, in my experience, it's heart palpitations. And then that means I probably should just pause a moment and pay attention to what's going on for myself, that I'm having this experience or response to something I heard or read or learned just right now in that moment. So that's what that is pay attention to what has heart and meaning for you. And it may not need to be verbalized, but it may just be something to take note of. And then, however, if it is an opportunity to engage in dialogue, there may be something there that we want to make sure we're creating space for you to express and share. And that's my role as a facilitator, is to pay attention to what's happening as best as I can in this sort of one format of a virtual Zoom. It's really hard to do, but there's strategies to try to pay attention to help with that. Do these seem like we could practice and agree to in our time together? Okay, I see a few head nods, great. So I want to pause now and do an introduction activity. Now that we've sort of set some foundation to our time together, I would love to learn more about who's here in our Zoom room, and would like to ask you to share in your introductory icebreaker your name and position at the college. So your title, if that resonates, your position, your location, and what attracted you to this session? What brought you to this workshop in particular? Like, why this one today? So I'll put that instruction in the chat here. Your name, title / position, and what brought you to this workshop today? Question mark. And we can go in any order. Let me see, there's 12 of us without me, and I'm just looking at our names here. For ease, why don't we just go alphabetically? with your first name. This is a common practice in my son's kindergarten class. So they line up by first name, and his first name starts with an A. So he's always like, Mom, why do I have to go first? I said, I'm sorry, son, we named you with the A name, not knowing what the practices are in pre-K and kindergarten. So I know, Jeanette, you could relate to this. We'll start friends here with A. So if your first name listed here begins with the letter A,
That's
and there's more than one of you, yeah, there's
me and Andrea. So if you don't mind, Andrea, I'll jump in first.
Yeah, I was gonna say you just go by then second letter, third letter, fourth letter, but we'll just also have Alex Peshkoff lead, then Alejandro,
Yeah.
then Andrea, and we'll get to it. Thank you,
We'll go
Alex.
from there. Yeah, plus I'm the first box on my screen, so just make it easy.
All
Good
right,
morning, everyone. My name is Alex Peshkoff. I teach history in the history department, part of the SBS Learning Community Division, whatever we go by now. I came to this workshop this morning because it just looked interesting on our list of flex activities, and I was probably going to encounter some of my friends. I know James and I know Henku. We are actually neighbors. The rest of you folks look familiar, but I don't think I personally know you except for maybe Claire. So it's good to see all of you guys here. That's who I am, and I look forward to a robust discussion.
Good morning, everyone. I think I'm next alphabetically, or more or less. So my name is Alejandro Torres. I also go by Alex. Pronouns are he, him, his. I'm the Dream Center specialist here at CRC. So for you that don't know what the Dream Center is, we provide services and resources to our undocumented students. So whether it's helping them with residency questions, or providing legal services, we provide that to, again, undocumented students and students from mixed status families. This really interested me because an equity focused space, I think it's really important to not only learn and relearn, things such as oppression, equity focused work. I think it's just important just to learn different scenarios. Every time you go to one of these workshops, you always learn something new. So I think it was really important for me to attend.
wonderful, thank you. And Andre, if you're available, great. Yeah, thank you.
I'm Andrea Dean. I am the administrative assistant for the Center for Professional Development. I joined you guys today just to some community, be part of the conversation and learn from you all.
I think I might be next, if I remember my alphabet. So my name is Gail D'Artes. I teach theater, and that's in the AME learning community at CRC. Why attending? Because this is an ongoing, it's ongoing learning for me. There's just ongoing, and I think that last fall there was a series of workshops in this thing, and I managed one or two, and I was sad to miss the others. So it's just ongoing learning about my relationship to these issues. And anyway, my preferred pronouns are she, her, hers. Thank you all for being here. Good to be in community.
Wonderful. We'll go D, E, F, G, H. You're muted, Hainku, but it's your turn when you're ready. Yeah.
Oh, my turn. Okay. I didn't pay attention to the alphabet. So anyway, my name is Henku and I'm teaching economics. I'm like hired the last semester, so I'm kind of new to the CRC. So that's why I'm still learning. And this is one of the workshop I'm interested in. When I see the description, it says like critical conversation to increase understanding of oppression, and those topic is I'm interested in, and because that's the moment like it's hard to help those student or anyone who with that kind of mindset. So that's why I'm here. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Hi, I'll start off with the 4 J's because I'm JA and I remember my alphabet. My name is James and I am a teacher at CRC. I teach in the psychology department. I think Jorge and I were hired together. So I think we're the longest, no, how long have you been here, Gail?
I think I started in 2005, 2006.
Yeah, so you have us beat.
2005.
You have
Wow.
us beat, but I'm an old hat here and been at CRC. I love my job. This is such a wonderful place. I joined today because I don't understand anything about what this is. I constantly am trying to find out and get definitions for things. It's been very difficult for me because I'll ask, okay, what do we mean by this? And I don't tend to get dialogue that really defines what it is we're discussing. Everything seems to be really subjective. And so I'm looking to operationalize something with definitions that we could all unify around and try to drive towards an outcome that is we could actually have a working definition for words. That way we can identify when we see them rather than have it be so subjective. So my goal for today is that we could orient ourselves towards a joining and a defining of terms so that we all don't just have however many there are here, 11 people's 11 subjective opinions about something, that we could actually unify behind something together and move forward and make progress here.
Thank you, James. And congratulations too on everyone's tenure and time at CRC. And that great, appreciate your input and honesty around what you'd like, an outcome you'd like. Thank you. Our series of J friends.
So I'm Jeanette Mulhern, and I'm ECE Department Chair. Early Childhood, Teaching, and Family is really our 3 different topics that we do. I'm also serving, have partial release as coordinator of the Nest Family Resource Center. That's a new resource on campus that we launched on ground last semester. And my why is I'm always drawn to these sort of topics, both for the self-work that's involved, but also being in community with others that are way above where I am in this process. You know, all that mix, right? I think helps you learn and reinforce, and then always thinking about my own position as it shifts and how the same, like James talked a little bit about definitions, but they change based on the context of my own work, the course I'm teaching, remembering to be inspired to put that extra practice into each semester and not let it get stale or freshen up my content. Yeah.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jessica Mao. I'm one of the success coaches for the PETA Hawk Center. We are new, so if you haven't heard of it, we're Asian American, Pacific Islander, and Desi American Center. So if you run across students who could benefit from us, we have openings in our program. The reason I picked this is because I think within our department, we have these conversations a lot. But I really was looking forward to hearing new perspectives and new ideas, since we don't get to talk with faculty all the time and don't get to always see other faculty outside of the SIB and staff outside of the SIB. So very excited to hear from all of you and all of you.
Thank you, Jessica. And Jorge.
I'm the last J. My name is Jorge Vaca, professor of mathematics, and I teach statistics and calculus. The reason for me being here and joining you guys is just to learn and to get a perspective that I don't have, and I would like to grow on that. So that's why I'm here.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I was taking notes of your why and just really appreciate your thoughtfulness and intentionality for showing up and being curious and interested in and supportive of this topic and being in community. That was an important theme throughout each of your openings or introductions, and also to hear the collective wisdom and the collective years of service and experience.
Sabrina.
Oh, Sabrina. Thank you, Gail. And Sabrina's just letting me go, letting me talk.
It's
All
so hard
right.
with Zoom, right? You
Yeah.
don't want to over talk or interrupt.
That's right.
I was just gonna like
So
take a moment and
awkward.
go, hi.
And I heard Jorge say I'm last, so I was with him. So
I
I'm so
think
sorry.
he meant last J, like
Yeah, last
all good.
J, but not last in the alphabet. Sabrina, my sincerest apologies.
Oh,
Your turn.
no worries. Hi, good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here. My name is Sabrina Sunsel. I have the honor of serving as your Dean of Institutional Effectiveness and Research and Planning here at CRC. And my reason for showing up this morning is always similar to a lot of you, curious to, one, I want to be in community with the learning on equity and understanding social justice and oppression, and then ultimately getting to know more colleagues in different spaces around campus. They always tend to engage in our areas and divisions, and especially on a topic as important as this, it's great to kind of hear and share in this learning with others outside of the department and outside of our division across the campus. So I'm appreciative of all of the diverse areas that we all represent across CRC this morning to share in this learning. So thank you for being here, and thank you, Claire, for honoring us with this lecture, or not lecture, workshop this morning. So.
Yes, yeah, thank you. And thanks for everyone's understanding. You know, you all spend a lot of time in front of groups or with teams and people, and nothing better than being able to laugh at yourself and make mistakes in public. So thanks also for everyone being so generous and extending grace too for this format, for this space. You know this too to be true. It's not ideal to take up this workshop in a Zoom environment. And so we're here and we're doing it in this way, and there's lots that gets missed, but it's also, you know, quite accessible, and there's a lot of cool nuances that we can you know, add to Zoom. So thank you for joining it in this way and engaging in communication and over communication, miscommunications already right now with me as the facilitator. So I am Claire Oliveros, and I have the honor to serve as the Vice President for Institutional Equity and Research and Planning. And this is a fairly new reorg of a division. We're in year 2. Some of you may know of me prior when I first came to CRC in 2019 as the Vice President for Student Services. And so we did a bit of a reorganization in the summer of 2021 during the pandemic to really have a concerted focus and effort to broaden our racial equity work and understanding and support social justice, diversity, equity, inclusion, and a sense of belonging for our employees and for our students. And so we are attempting this ambitious vision with this division. The division that I oversee right now includes the Office of Research and Equity, Sabrina's area and Andrea Dean's area, Center for Professional Development, the Center for Inclusion and Belonging, which the Apita Hawk Care Center and the Dream Center are part of. The center's new. As well, this past fall, I also support and oversee the Hawk Care Center for Basic Needs, as well as Student Life and Leadership and Senate, and the Mi Casa Center HSI grant, and the Apita Hawk Cares, the Apita Hawk Centers and a PC grant. Now that's a lot of acronyms there, but we are a minority serving institution that is designated as a Hispanic serving institution and an Asian American Pacific Islander serving institution. And we were awarded 2 large federally funded grants to support these student success programs. And so that's part of this division, along with Title IX and equity. So this division is growing and also consolidating our efforts around equity and engagement for students and for employees, and also championing college planning and accreditation. We just finished the accreditation visit last fall, thanks to Sabrina as our liaison officer, and also program review, et cetera, is situated in this division. So you could think of it as the division that helps to support and lead strategic planning and DEI work. DEI for short is diversity, equity, inclusion work. what I want to share a little bit about is how I got here to like this work and showing up today on January 10th, 2023. So I'm on my 4th year here at CRC, however, not new to higher ed. I'm in my 28th season of higher education. I started at 21, right out of college, first in my family to attend college, out of Portland, Oregon. I grew up mixed race, single mom, Filipina and white with Jewish ancestry and Catholicism roots. So have quite the multi-ethnic, multiracial, biracial community and bilingual community of family and relatives. And what introduced me to this topic, because I didn't just sort of get the terminology and it didn't just sort of happen overnight, was a journey through my own experience as a young girl of color in a predominantly white city, raised by my white Jewish mother and predominantly my grandmothers, my maternal and paternal grandmothers, Lola and Baba, who've passed on, have really instilled in me the curiosity to ask questions, to show up, to try something new, really the sort of survival. I would say my experience as a second generation Filipino immigrant and then third generation Jewish immigrant is the making something from nothing and the thriving and the surviving. We knew education was important, but we didn't have a means to get there. So as a first generation college going student, it was the lifeline of TRIO student support services and multicultural student affairs that supported me on my journey to think about staying in college and thriving and graduating. And then that opened up an opportunity to think about a career in higher education. I was at college at a time when the Rodney King verdict, the Rodney King beating happened and the LA riots took place in 91, spring of 91. Does anyone remember that? So I was a freshman in college and I was one of a group of 10 students of color that were part of an affirmative action quota system to diversify a liberal arts, predominantly white college. And we all were pretty angry and had questions about why are we here and why aren't any of our friends or family here? And then at the same time, this monumental event publicly, took place in California, in Southern California, in LA, that really shook many of us to our core and impacted the ways in which we relate across racial lines. And so I started to ask questions and get involved in student organizing at Western Oregon University. And we held a series of, we called them racial dialogues back then in 91, 92, and formed a coalition and organized student services and helped to really change the structural inequities that we saw at a small, predominantly white university that just had a handful of students of color. So I would say that those early markings of my sort of being politicized around race because of a recent social event, social movement that happened and violence that happened, racial violence that happened in LA really informed the foundation for why it's so important to stay in college and why it was important to take agency and transform the institutions that we're in. So that was the early beginnings. I think that was the one incident, if you will, that really helped to confirm an investment and a commitment in understanding race, understanding who I am as at then a young girl, mixed race of color, who often was mistaken for Latina or Black and white or everything but Filipino. At that time too, in the early 90s, there was really a lack of understanding about Filipino culture, Filipino history, Filipino languages, and the Filipino community in Portland, which exists, 4%, but it exists. So I spent a lot of time having to learn myself and educate people about, actually, I'm Filipino and white. My last name, Oliveros, is Spanish because if you know your history, I'm saying this to the person who's asking me, where are you from? Who are you? Because those are the questions I often get and still get, but just not as much because I'm older now. I'm as an older woman, I'm also less visible. So no one's curious like they were when I was a kid about like, where are you from? Who are you? And those questions really kind of chomped at me for this deeper curiosity and understanding about the labeling and why am I mislabeled so frequently. So that's embarked me on a journey for understanding Filipino history and knowledge of self, and engaged in a variety of Filipino community organizing and launched organizations while also supporting multiracial efforts in the university. So fast forward to today, some of this experience, while it's personal and lived and very subjective, helped inform my schooling and my trajectory. And so I want to explain that the content of today is not only informed by my lived experience, which is grounded in social science research, that it is taking a subjective lens, to your earlier point, James, that social sciences take up qualitative and quantitative research from a particular epistemology perspective. And the epistemological perspective that I take is critical social science and critical theory. So I want to just say that up front. And I have been informed and influenced by Black feminist thought, by critical race theory, and also Filipino pedagogy, Filipino American history and pedagogy. So I use my personal story and just a little glimpse of what life was like for me as an 18-year-old in my 18-year-old mind, trying to make sense of the world, and then informed and influenced by my academic training and also student development and student affairs training in developing and launching the first multicultural center at Portland Community College in '98, by launching a TRIO program at the Portland Community College Cascade Department or Cascade campus, by also being the inaugural Chief Diversity Officer. At the time it was called Director of Diversity Development at Portland Community College, and so on. So my early upbringing in higher ed is at the front door of minority affairs, multicultural affairs, and DEI work in higher ed. So it's nearly 30 years of DEI, J for justice, and AA, anti-racism and accessibility work, all in a culmination of just another hour together to talk about oppression. But I want to share that with you so you understand where it's anchored and where it comes from. So it's heart and head work, supported and backed up by scholarly work of authors like Patricia Hill Collins, Bell Hooks, Paul Gorski, Equity Literacy Institute, a white anti-racist facilitator, Paul Gorski, Peggy McIntosh, who does whiteness studies. And Bell Hooks, who writes about beloved community, teaching to transgress, Patricia Hill Collins, Black feminist thought, Kimberly Crenshaw, intersectionality and critical race theory. The list could go on, but I want you to know that that informs and is all that's behind me in who I am today and how I choose to show up. Filipino scholars, Dr. Kevin Nadal, Dr. Robin Rodriguez, Kevin Nadal on microaggressions impacting the LGBTQ community and Filipino mental health. Robin Rodriguez, Filipino American history, Asian American studies, unpacking the journey of the academic professorate as a Filipino woman. And so again, it could go on, but they're also my cohort that were the same age. I turned 49 this year. So while it's grounded in history and research, it's 50 years old and it's still evolving. Maybe 60 years old, because I think of Kimberly Crenshaw's early work, and her predecessor probably started this in the 60s. So it's not that old. And it's evolving and working. And so when you see the documents here where I say working definition or working agreements, that's because it's evolving and it's got a foundation, but it's evolving. So I'm saying all this to situate this content and the series. And to Gail's earlier point, there was a series that I launched in the fall on Tuesdays. And I really appreciate those that could attend. And the feedback was, do this in a flex workshop or do this in the afternoons. And so I'd like to also work with you to think of other ways to incorporate this. But this is really important to be able to support you all and harness the energy and the expertise you bring to inform the next 50 years of what this could look like. building on the foundation of the foremothers and forefathers, grandmothers and grandfathers of this movement, which really comes out of the civil rights movement and has evolved into really a multi-pronged approach for social justice and environmental justice and change. So I want to move us into now unpacking the definition of SOAR. But any questions about the content or the context for this work and where it comes from? On a practical and operational level, I want to also share that this information, forms of oppression and understanding oppression and the language of inclusion and belonging also comes out of student affairs research and culturally responsive pedagogy that supports techniques and strategies for changing some of the structural inequities that happen in our institutions, both in and out of the classroom. So that's the practical experience of understanding the theoretical. So the theory informs our language and our way of knowing and our way of being, and affirms many of us who haven't seen ourselves in the literature or in the classroom as an instructor or professor, and then gives us the foundation, the platform to design with equity in mind. And that's the intent of this content. The intent of this content is to give you shared understanding, be in community, some new language, and then tools to think about adopting. And that's not all going to happen today. It's not part of this work is, open to outcome, not attached. It's not going to be packaged and tied with a bow. It's going to take time. And what I also want to reinforce is that this is intergenerational work. I mentioned, I'm almost 30 years in here, and there were people before, during, and that are going to come after to build on this work. And it is intergenerational work, and it's work for the long haul, because the unlearning doesn't happen overnight either. This is the beginning of hopefully ongoing and support of where you are in your own journey. So when you think about SOAR, this emerged out of our We Won't Fall narrative. We have this belief at the college that we want to change the way we've done business by incorporating 13 targets that help us address structural inequities that have been barriers to Black and Latinx student achievement. And that's all evidential in the research that Sabrina and Paul and Katie have conducted around looking at our disaggregated data and helping us sharpen these 12 targets, which were informed by faculty, staff, student, and administrator constituency groups. And so last year, I think it was a year ago at Spring Convocation, I introduced this acronym to stand up for social change and racial equity, oust oppression and institutional barriers, and activate awareness and ask for help, and develop a readiness and a responsiveness and a resistance to structural barriers or to forms of oppression or to dismantling the systems that have harmed us. And so that's where this acronym was birthed, SOAR. Communities in practice will soar. And that communities in practice was our theme last spring. This year, our theme is reflect, reset, and reimagine. And so this fits very nicely into this ongoing work that some of us feel called to do. Others of us feel like we have to do, and others are like, I want to support, but I don't know how. And then there's lots of things in between. So this is a great way to kind of recalibrate and connect around these sort of complex and squishy topics, not so cut and dried like computational equations, right, Jorge? Like, it's not very cut and dried. This is the stuff that's squishy, that's subjective, that you got to take further, research or knowledge into. And so just know that about these concepts, that there can be definitions, and I'll share them next, but that they also then have an application that looks different based on who you are and how you experience the world. And that's, got to sit with that for a minute. Like, okay, but if I don't know anybody else or know anyone's way of how they experience things, then my way must be the only way. And we know that from being in education and higher learning, that just doesn't add up, because students are constantly, and staff are constantly reminding us that, like, oh, there's lots of ways to be in the world. There's lots of ways to show up. And our students really are the ones who most inform us about this. Any questions so far?
I had a question I just put in the chat.
Oh,
Claire,
I'm sorry.
No, that's okay.
Thank you.
I knew that chat maintenance is always hard when you're speaking. But what was the kind of mission for this semester? It started with R's, I remember, but I wanted to write it down.
Yes, it's reflect, reset, and reimagine. Yeah.
Thank
So
you.
it's got it there. And our keynote presenters are also going to incorporate their remarks tied to this. Great. Well, let me start with one working definition. And it's the definition of oppression. And then I'm going to shift to another document so you have it, and I'll drop it in the chat as well. Volunteer, please, to read this definition if you'd like. Anyone who's read before, hasn't had a chance to read.
A system that maintains advantage and disadvantage based on social group memberships and operates intentionally and unintentionally on individual, institutional, and cultural levels.
Great, thank you. We need to unpack that, yeah? What does that mean? A system, so like what? What's an example of a system?
The one that we all teach in.
Yeah, education, it's a good one.
Voting.
Maintain, go ahead.
Oh, I was gonna say voting,
Voting.
like voting laws.
Yep, voting, that's right. Our government structure and voter voting. Yes, good system. That maintains advantage and disadvantage based on social group membership. So what are examples of social group membership?
Different social groups.
Race,
so,
gender,
yeah, race, gender.
Alex, Jeanette. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
socioeconomic.
Yep. Great examples.
Religion,
Mm-hmm. Yep.
class, oh, someone said socioeconomic already.
Yep. Yes. Yeah. All
Yeah.
that. Where? What else?
Ableism, like.
Yeah. So ability. Yep. Mm-hmm. That's a social group member. If you think about the sort of 8 diversity characteristics, it's typically, race, ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation, religion, ability, class. Did I already say that?
And age.
Age, religion. There's typically that sort of they're all listed in our equal employment opportunity language, right? You see it listed, right? Unlawful to discriminate against,
I have a question, Claire.
Yes, James. Oops.
Can you go back to that definition?
Yes. Am I sharing screen still? You see it?
Yes.
Yes. So something happened yesterday, which was interesting, and I wonder if it enables us to utilize sort of a practical application of whether or not this particular system is oppressive. My kids were kept back from going to school yesterday. So they originally had planned to go to school, but the group that runs their school, the district, said that 5 of the schools didn't have the ability to go back. And so they took all of the students and said, so instead of just those 5 schools that can't go back because of power, not power like social justice power like electrical,
Yes.
they kept all students in the district home for 1 more day of instruction. And I wonder, is that a form of oppression? Or is it not oppression because they've only disadvantaged everyone equally?
Yeah. I mean, boy, that would be a good one to unpack. So if we take that example, the system would be the district.
Right.
Okay. And then the advantage, disadvantage would be the ways in which some school age children across or the district, because the advantage disadvantage is the people,
Right.
the social group member who have social group membership. And so then what happened is the institution operationalized it unintentionally or intentionally, that impacted on an individual, institutional, and interpersonal level.
I think they made mention, if I go back to the email, about the fact that the 5 schools were particularly disadvantaged groups of people. And so if they allowed for people to go back to schools that were not particularly disadvantaged schools, then that would create more inequity.
That's right.
I think that was their statement. And yet the option is it's not oppressive, even if it only advantages everybody or if it only disadvantages everybody.
Yes, and you have to go back to the word power, have to be a member of the power group. So in this instance, the district was attempting to introduce equality and equity in their decision, which is a little different than what we're going to jump into. And so I'll jump into that next. So we'll come back to this definition, but let's look at this matrix. This helps us further unpack where it might have been oppressive. In the case that you just shared, that I'm just sort of taking at face value, my guess is those 5 schools, to your point, potentially are probably in lower socioeconomic neighborhoods, have less access to resources. Families may have been disproportionately impacted by the storm. And so the district tried their best by making the decision they landed on to introduce something equitable that also addressed equality. Let me actually go to my definition tab here. This is why I have all these things open. So please forgive me for the cluttered screen. So I was just paraphrasing here. I'm going to show you some definitions. Now, I don't want to blow your mind because we're not going to go through all these, but let me show you some definitions. Some of these are on our website. Okay, so is this working? Do you see our website? Okay, so here I took our prior content with the help of Sabrina, and we've got it on our website. So if you look at our website, there are some working definitions here and in this document. But what I'm going to introduce today is a much more comprehensive list. Do you see this list? And I'll make this available as well. So this list comes from this text here. I'm going to go back to do you see the PowerPoint?
Yes.
Okay, great. So this has been my text that I've gone back to over and over again, and it's in its maybe 4th edition now. Teaching for Diversity and Social Justice has one of my favorite Shiros and professors, and I think at one point was a previous president, Marianne Adams, out of University of Wisconsin at the time. They're in like their 4th edition of this book, and it also has a reader. So this is the text, and then the text has a second version, a reader. We'll make sure we get copies of this available through the Center for PD in our library. But this has been my go-to for 20 years. And what I extrapolate year after year when I have conducted trainings, and that was where I was going before, was about the operationalizing. It's really helpful in any group to have shared definitions. To James' earlier point, and to each of you, some of your comments earlier, it's really helpful because then we kind of all know what we're working with. We may not be experts in it or versed in it or recall it when we're asked, but maybe we can because that's the practice, but we can go back and reference this. And so Dr. Adams' team that wrote this book has this list that they continue to develop and evolve over time as research emerges and as the practical application of this work is informed by social justice movements and by community organizations and activists who are in the trenches doing this work on behalf of our communities. And so this continues to evolve, and I call them right now social justice definitions. They call it in their textbook diversity definitions. And so this is really comprehensive, A to X, A to Z. And so I want to have this for you all to reference to, but we're not going to go through these 11 pages together, but I want you to know that it exists. And many of us who are in the DEIJ space and are operationalizing our work draw on this research. And so I'm going to be using some of this language back and forth. I already have, you can reference this and have it for yourself as a reference as well to go back to, and maybe we'll get copies of that text for you too. Is there a chat here? Yeah, yes. So that's the other benefit of this list and the work out of the teaching for social justice text is it's really tries to be comprehensive A through Z. And our attempt on our website is to have a little glimpse of that. But our hope is to have these as drop downs. University of Washington School of Medicine on their DEI website is the one I look to for updates, because they have operationalized on their website A through Z, and each word is a drop down. And so they can go in and update it, especially as the social movements are informing us about how to update or change this language based on social power. So that's one reference here. I want to now go back to the slide and then take a look at this. So this is an opportunity now to have a little bit of free write and self-reflection on thinking about oppression and who's the advantaged, disadvantaged group. So what the researchers say in Teaching for Diversity and Social Justice is that there is a matrix of oppression that exists. And Professor Crenshaw talks about intersectionality. She shows up as a Black woman. The things that she experiences, or the things, the work that she's doing around Black women's justice, you cannot tease apart race and gender. That in fact, some of those forms of oppression and its structural barriers are occurring because of the intersectionality of being a Black woman and of being Black and a woman. So that's what she posits. That's her research that we then draw from to help inform our social identity. So we talked about there's kind of these 8 big ones. And if you look down, if you can follow along, and here's my notes on our little free write. We'll follow along together. Take a few moments to think about your own identities here. And let me, yes, I can't do this in real time. Just, if we were in person and I had my old school, you know, what did we used to use? The overhead projector? If I had my old school overhead projector, I'd put a piece of paper over these 4 columns right here. You follow me where I'm going? And so pretend you don't see those 4 columns, and let's just look at this one, social identity categories. Let's just look at that one and take a moment to take a moment to self-reflect on your own identity categories, and just on a separate sheet of paper, or in your mind's eye, which social groups do you belong to? Possibly there's more than one. There's more than one. Your race or ethnicity, your biological sex, your gender, your sexual orientation, your class, your ability or disability. And some of the terminology is from this text that has been updated, your religion, your age. And these are the kind of most, these are the big categories. So just take a moment. These are the salient. Here's my note again, salient identities that come into play in different situations when we're thinking about social groups and sociology of people, right? Or the sociology of our environment, our everyday environment. Were you able to come up with a couple here? Yeah, oh yeah, and you have a wheel. Yeah, that's awesome, Gail. Would you like to share the identities that you've, if you're comfortable, would you like to share the identities that you've?
Sure, I just
highlighted?
did a workshop over the weekend that was offered by Art Equity through my alma mater, the Yale School of Drama. And
Awesome.
we actually did an exercise in what they called identity and social location. So, and it was presented to us as a wheel. I don't know how I can get this to you.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes.
So, again, race, citizenship, age, religion, sexual orientation, class, gender, disability. And age was even more specifically than just adult, but 37-ish to 65-ish, depending on the context, was the, what shall we say, the dominant culture, or what is seen as the dominant culture. So what we're doing is identifying where we intersect with the dominant culture and how many of these pieces of pie I
Uh-huh.
do 6 out of 8.
Okay.
So it's then to me to look and discuss and identify the privileges that come with identifying with what's considered the dominant culture
Mhm.
and being a member of this historically dominant culture. And then to look at, we went through and we identified what are those privileges. And then I'm sure this is going to come into play later when you talk about disrupting oppression, is how we can identify ways to interrupt and equalize power.
Yeah, wonderful.
But we have to understand where we land with relation to what's the historically dominant culture and
Thank you,
understand.
Yeah, that's so great. That wheel,
Yeah.
the teaching for diversity and social justice uses a similar wheel of socialization. Do you want to share with us just a few of those salient identities that you identify with?
Oh, sure.
Before we go
I'm
to
everywhere
Alex.
on the wheel. I'm 65 now, so I'm sort of on the border of the age. So that's where I don't really historically, especially being as a woman, as you said, the older we get as women, the more invisible we become in society. So I'm starting to really feel that. And I'm not a cis male, though I am cisgender. All the other places where I identify and socially locate myself with the historically dominant culture are that I'm an individual without disability, though I do have hearing aids. I am white. There was an interesting thing, just a little sidebar, and I don't want to hijack this, but we were asked in our introduction what race we identify and why. What pronouns do we use and why? And so there was something about why do I identify as race, which made me look at my ancestry more. Anyway, it was a really interesting kind of, no one asked me why before. So it was really great. Citizenship, US born, religion, Christianity, you name Protestantism, and someone in the workshop used the term, I speak Christianity. So that's where how I socially locate myself with the historically dominant culture of Christianity. I can speak Christian. And I am heterosexual, and I am, though I guess I'm middle class. I'm not upper class. I mean, one thing to look at is, do you own what you have, as a way to determine where you are in that class structure too. So we are a homeowner. I have health insurance. I own a car. So that puts me in a class that relates to the historically dominant culture with regards to that specific identifier.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Thank you for sharing your perspective and your thoughts around also the training that you just had. That's really helpful. And you did a great job of being able to identify through this list your identities, but you also complicated it in a good way by sharing how it interacts with dominant structures. And so for some of us, and I'll get to you right away, Alex, for some of us, we've done this before, the identity categories. This is just an opportunity to kind of refresh and then move us. I asked you to look down the categories, but then we're going to move across, which is what makes it a matrix, to get at the things that Gail has mentioned. Then I'll move us into thinking about examples. So this is great, all related. Alex.
Yes, thank you. I was just wondering, because I'm just worried about the time that we have left together, if we could have a discussion on the systems of power that James brought up earlier. Because while it's always important to do this individual work, how do I individually identify? From my perspective, I'm really concerned and worried and interested in systems of power and systems of oppression.
Yeah, great.
And I think James brings up a wonderful point here that I think it would be healthy and fruitful to discuss. How do we achieve equity without disabling or affecting all of us? In other words, is the answer, let's just negatively affect everyone because that will be more equitable, rather than saying, well, who is inequitably being disadvantaged, and how do we then, you know, make up for that day or 2 or 3 days of lost schooling in those 5 schools that have been affected by the weather? And I think that we don't have that discussion not only in our country, but sometimes as faculty. How, you know, these systems of power are really, really important, and I'm hoping that we can have more of a discussion on that.
Yes, thank you. Other thoughts before I shift, other thoughts about the matrix of oppression. I mean, it does give us some shared terminology here that when we talk about identity groups, we're talking about socially constructed identity groups. Because again, white folks aren't ever asked, how do you know you're white? Or how do you know your race? Excuse me, your race is actually the specific that Gail said the icebreaker was share your race and your sexual orientation, and how do you know? And so I think that's really important context as we think about identity groups. These are socially constructed, and then they provide advantages and disadvantages based on your membership or perceived membership to this group. And so if you read across the matrix, there's a privileged societal group, there's border social groups, which mean like mixed race or kind of not so cut and dried, you know, you can't fit nicely into this box or that box. Then there's targeted social group. And then there's the form of oppression, which is the ism. And so if you just look across here, and we'll just focus on race, in US culture, but it has some experiences also in other countries. I'll use the Philippines as an example, being a colonized country. Light-skinned and white people in the society have access, social privileges and access to resources that people who are darker or shades of brown or black on the spectrum do not have. And that is what creates the structure or the system of racism. So unequal and inequitable access to resources and privileges, et cetera, based on race. And so that's the unearned privilege of light skin or whiteness is the ways in which it shows up here for racism. Thank you, Jessica. No worries. We'll make sure you get material. Thank you so much. And again, if anyone has questions too, I'm available offline. So this just gives us some working language around a matrix of oppression, and to be have understanding of a privileged group and a target group. I also have, related to the definition of oppression, another document I want to share. Does this screen, do you see this screen? So this gets at, what is this one? Yeah, sorry, this really situates power and privilege. And so this is available to you too. I'll make this available. This helps us unpack further the matrix that I just showed and the exercise we're about to do. And so I'm going to try to toggle back and forth here. I'm going to go back to the slide. Here we are, the matrix. This just gives us the groups that are most affected, and then we'll go into the systems. Does anyone else have any questions about your identity groups?
I can't get over a couple of these,
yes,
these issues, like on that past one that you had up with the definitions of
yes.
stereotype. Stereotype says an exaggerated or distorted belief that attributes characteristics to members of a group.
Yeah.
Isn't that what we're doing by looking at that other matrix?
What that matrix shows is terminology, but again, yeah, it shows like
if let's stop right here. We
yeah.
started with one, we went to the race, and we say
yeah.
white people, right?
Yep.
We are by definition stereotyping them to say that they are the privileged social group, because again, time, place are all relevant contexts for how this matrix of oppression shifts, and it should really be rooted in the current context as to where we are, rather than just having it sort of this broad spectrum, saying that every adult is privileged. For
right.
example, during COVID,
yeah.
we were not. We were
That's
more
right.
at risk of COVID, dying from COVID, than children, right? So we were
yes.
not privileged in a particular context. And so
right.
this is very much stereotyping.
It is. That's one way to look at stereotyping. Yes, stereotypes can be positive and negative and can affect all groups.
You look at privileged social group, right? If you are white people in Japan, for example,
That's
you
right.
are not by definition, the socially privileged group. So you have to be very specific about what we're saying is this matrix of oppression for a particular time and for a particular place.
I mean,
Yes.
if I can jump on.
And there
the-
is a particular time and a place for this document because this situates it in the context of looking at our societal structure. Historically, because of race as a construct, whiteness, white people are the privileged group that are not as impacted around particular types of racism. So,
And-
but what you're talking about is on an interpersonal level,
Well,
changing conditions.
there's one more
Yeah.
situation that kind of just came out to me. And I was like, well,
Yeah.
you know where they're not privileged is in this context, what we're discussing. Think about it. What
Yeah.
we're saying here is that they have power and privilege, and therefore we have created a valence on which that is actually worse than, say, other people who have been marginalized, who do not have power.
Yes.
So by definition, what we're doing is subverting that power now.
Well,
I
what
don't
we're-
understand what you mean, James.
Yeah, and let me just offer a
When you
caveat. too.
identify one group as a privileged group, and we're saying that privileging a group is bad.
No, that's where I was going to clarify. This isn't a judgment. This is an acknowledgement of the structural system.
If it's not bad, then why do anything about it?
Because it's-
Can it,
Yeah, well,
Could I-
because it's harmful.
I would
Yes, Gail,
interject that I
saw
would say
Sabrina
that,
too. Mhm.
what?
I
Sorry.
saw Sabrina as well, but go ahead, Gail.
In the workshop that I just did, white was considered an historically, being white is a member of the historically dominant culture as opposed to privileged culture. So we didn't use the term when we identified whiteness. It was like, what is, with regards to race in the context of the US, what is the dominant culture? It's white. So it had less to do with what is the privileged group, what is the dominant culture that frames, how everything. So it really is less about it. It was an interesting kind of reframing of what that is. So it really is just about acknowledging the dominant culture in the US. And
That's right.
it really is white.
And
There are
examples here.
privileges inherent to being a member of that historically dominant culture. There are. And those can be identified. As opposed to saying it's bad, it's just like let's just identify them and name them.
Right, but if we're saying something should be changed because it's, say, not equitable and we value equity, we value equal opportunities, and then you're saying that one particular intersectional identity piece of somebody makes them, as you suggested, in the dominant culture, then give privileges that others don't have, we need to do something to unravel that, right? And so what we're saying is, therefore, it should be taken down. And I bring this up like, you have, let's say, these schools that in Sac City were predominantly not white and they didn't have power. Then shut down all schools for those schools that were predominantly white in order to create equity is something that I was kind of bringing up. And that's not the situation that I perceived. I don't think Sutterville Elementary is predominantly, a minority school, but I'm saying that in this situation, we are making a valence, right? We're creating a hierarchy of where something should be. In order to flatten that hierarchy, we have to identify what's on top of the hierarchy. And so when you say white people are privileged in this particular context, you're literally making them something to flatten out, right?
No.
Can you think of it?
And Gail, let me just bring us back. I don't want to take a lot of time to try to convince a belief, but what I do want to say is we're zooming out and looking at this from a systemic and structural. The ways in which it plays out interpersonally and individually is going to be very different. And you're describing that nuance, James. So I don't want to derail from making sure we kind of are on this same understanding of the concepts before we go into the nuances, because this is us zooming out to understand the identity categories, which groups have historically been agents or targets, and the type of oppression, and to recognize that when you're in this agent column, you have an opportunity to make some change. And so we haven't said what the outcome is in this space, and we haven't made a judgment on any of the columns. It's a natural kind of response, but that's not what we're doing here. And we can have a further conversation together about those nuances and when a judgment gets made, or when it looks like it's being flip-flopped. We can definitely unpack that further. This is to give us some foundational work to understand historically, and in the context of it, institutions like law enforcement, education, etc., these things play out differently. So we'll just pause a moment, James, on this particular discussion so we can move on. And I know Sabrina had your hand up as well, so we can go there. And then I'd like to just give some examples of how it shows up.
I'll try to make my kind of what I wanted to share is that I think Claire, you already addressed it, but what I wanted is what we're talking about in terms of, I understand wanting to bring in the concept of stereotype threat, but what I understand being framed in terms of context is the backdrop of how Gail presented in American society, and also in the ways in which, you know, I think we always get caught up in you're making people feel bad for who they are. I think what we're trying to identify is there are spaces that have been designed to privilege you in ways that are intentionally designed to disadvantage or not privilege other groups. And I think the matrix is trying to visualize when you enter in certain spaces, you have a better understanding where you're going to get more benefit of the doubt based on the system you're interacting with, based on your social group, because the system was designed to serve you in a sense. And so
That's great.
And so I just want to emphasize it's about the experiences of how oppression shows up in these systems intentionally, because it was designed to serve those who are privileged in that sense, even in the ways in which the sidewalks and how we have to ensure, you know, or the computer or the hallways, you have to now be more sensitive to the ways it's accessible for all people. But in a sense, it's not the default, right? You have to be intentional. And so I just want to share that it's, you know, all of the categories that we're going to unpack with Claire, I just don't want it to be a kind of broadened outside of the application of what we're trying to unpack with oppression and the ways in which, you know, the privilege itself is, the person experiencing the privilege is not inherently bad, and therefore the stereotype applied to that, I don't see that in that way. I do see that when you are understanding the system of oppression that's being applied, it is the cloak in which you get to navigate and not have to experience the doubt or experiencing the application of a system like corporal punishment and police, because you identify as a white female and you can call the police on a black male. That has real consequences because of the ways in which oppression works. And that I just want to kind of like, you know, go back to the 20,000 or, you know, zoom out, because we're looking at the system of oppression and the ways in which our identity, how we navigate that, whether it be it privilege or not privilege in the current state of how things lay.
Well said. Really great points and good feedback to think about the default. So in this society, the default, and Gail touched on this too, the default for the ways in which things have been designed, and this isn't a judgment, this is to just take a look at, it has been oriented towards whiteness or white men of a particular age and religion and sexual orientation of heterosexual. That's just the sort of the forefathers that built the country on the backs of enslaved Africans, that is the existence. And we're not going to debate that origin story, but what we are going to pay attention to is how these systems show up and then impact us on an individual level, interpersonally and institutionally. And I think both Alex and James, you raised the kind of intersection of institutional, interpersonal, and individual. And that's where I'm going to go to next after this. But here are some concrete examples that sort of support what y'all have already shared about Like racism shows up. One example is Black voter suppression. I had these marked out, but you know this group, you've been through some of these trainings before and understand like the ways in which the form of oppression shows up that impacts gender or youth and women and children is sexist jokes, or children are here to speak when spoken to. That kind of stereotype and belief system exists because of a structural system that disadvantaged women and youth, or women, youth, and children. For sexual orientation, anti-gay marriage legislation, church teachings, etc., hate crimes, hate violence, and murder of transgender, Black, Indigenous, people of color, or transgender. Those are all examples of the ways in which heterosexism and homophobia show up. Henku, do you have a question? I'm sorry. Did you have your hand?
No, not question. I'm just exercising myself.
Okay, yeah. So,
but I have a one question.
Following your cue, I was going to have us raise our hands too.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I have a one
Yes.
practical question, because last semester I studied and I kind of asked a student to identify pronouns on Canvas, but some of the students say, I don't want to identify pronoun. So in such a case, how can we deal with it? Like practically just let them optional, or?
Yeah, I think that's a great practice. And I was going to use that example around sexual orientation. So I identify, as I already shared, Filipina, mixed race, Filipina and white, and also use pronouns as a heterosexual cisgender woman, because I know that there has been a history and uncertainty for my LGBTQ friends to feel comfortable being able to come out. And so by being a straight woman, cisgender identified heterosexual woman, I use my pronouns here in support and solidarity that I recognize there are other pronouns beyond the default, to use Sabrina's language, which is she, her, hers, or which is he and her, that there are others. And so, I think when you apply this in the classroom, not everybody may not understand the importance of sharing pronouns as being a way of creating an inclusive classroom for non-binary students, or transgender students, or LGBTQ students. So it's a practice to create a more inclusive and welcoming environment, but it's also optional.
That's my intention.
Yes.
But problem is, if they don't like identify it, it's hard to sometimes distinguish, right? So
yeah,
I don't know.
I think that it's an important practice and make it optional. But I also think then it points to us needing to have more conversation and explanation about why we do it. So that students who've never been asked before, who may identify as heterosexual, understand why it's important to say she, her, if they identify she or hers, or he, him, his, understand that the default isn't male or female. And that's one of the reasons I use it, is I'm acknowledging my privilege and power as a cisgender heterosexual woman by having she, her here in my Zoom name or whenever, to be able to create a more inclusive environment. And I failed to say my pronouns when I introduced myself because I leaned too much on my name tag here. And it's a good reminder too, when I'm back in person in meetings, to do it verbally, not just rely on my Zoom label, but it's a good reminder that I also failed. I made a mistake and didn't say it in my introduction. But it's also education and giving people the time and space to learn it and contribute at their own pace. Other thoughts about pronouns, sharing pronouns, or any of these examples of forms of isms?
I feel differently. So I just want to tell you, Hanku, that what Claire said is one perspective, and there are other perspectives. So there's a diversity of thoughts considering the linguistic dominant culture and how they may use their power to suggest the way we use language. We have differences in our opinion. So I just wanted to share that, Hanku, that there are alternatives.
What might be an example of an alternative, James?
That's my question.
An alternative to stating pronouns is not stating pronouns.
Yeah, right. So then there, it kind of is an alternate, but then is it a way of welcoming
100%, I am
students?
welcome to all.
Is there another
people.
way? Yeah.
I am welcoming to all people.
And choose not to introduce with pronouns.
And I choose not to introduce, I choose not to cede my linguistic right to describe the world as I see it subjectively.
Yeah.
To a particular system.
But
Yeah.
if I have a question,
Yeah,
James, if
and
your
so
student-
let's have some other considerations too, because there could be some other options or considerations that do advantage students who may not fit into that are non-binary, that may not fit into the binary male, female. Sabrina.
I was just wanting to ask a clarifying, like, so if, in terms of welcoming all students, if a student were to approach you and say, Professor Frizzy, I don't identify as I present, I identify as she, hers, and I'd like to be I'd like you to address me that way, or however, if they were to want to step forward and share that with you because you're creating a welcoming environment for them to want to step forward and share. Is that something, I think that's where it goes both ways. It's all, of course, okay not to want to engage, perhaps in adopting it, if that's not how you identify or how you present in terms of creating the welcoming environment. But if the student were to take the initiative to say, Professor, I'd like to share with you that I identify, or how they engage in the classroom is saying, hi, my name is so-and-so, I identify as she, her, hers. Is that open in your classroom as well? Like if someone were to say, who presents, say, male, and I identify as they, them, or there's a variety, but I'm just curious if understanding your position of, how you subjectively use linguistics and however, just wanting to know how that student would experience being welcomed if they wanted to engage in identifying their pronouns and and if it contradicts how you see them presenting themselves.
Right, I think this is a great discussion topic. Unfortunately, it doesn't often happen. I teach human sexuality, so I have probably the opportunity to have the most transgendered folks of any of you. Like I teach them, they're my students. They are phenomenal people. And not one student has ever come to me and said, I would like you to use alternative pronouns to the way I'm presenting myself. Now, if they did, and when they do, I'm guessing that sometime in the future that this is going to happen to me, just because of the nature of the topic that I teach and the fact that I have a disproportionately large sample of transgender students. I think it's going to be an interesting conversation. What I want to make sure is that that student knows they have a place, they are welcomed in my class, and that they are valued as a person, irrespective of any identifying marker individually about them subjectively, that they come imbued as a person with value in my classroom. And while we may have differences, I want to make sure that that is 100% known by that student. So while I'm not saying what I'll do in some hypothetical future, I am saying that my goal, my orientation towards them is one of acceptance and welcoming.
Yeah, thanks, James. I see Alejandro's hand too. I think that what you're describing is, the option to do a pronoun introduction or not, and it's your call, your decision. I want to just pay attention to the language or the loadedness of saying alternative or subjective, because for members of our LGBT community, it's not an option and it's not subjective. Their sexual orientation and identity is at their core. And so it would be like saying to a Christian, it's a choice, it doesn't exist, when that might be their 4th generation experience growing up as a Christian. So that's an example right there of dominant or advantage, disadvantaged language. And just it's a request to be mindful and aware of language that may be judgmental, whether we intend it to be or not. And so saying alternative or saying the term subjective could be, could shut down an invitation to come and share with you. I just want to offer that as a perspective.
So just to make
Alejandro.
sure, like, is it okay to ask them, like, if you need to, you can identify yourself, right?
Yeah, optional. That's
Better?
right.
Okay.
Optional, but others may have other thoughts as well.
Yeah.
Alejandro.
So,
Yeah, not a requirement. We're not checking ID or middle names. You know what I mean? Not a requirement. It's an
yeah, because
optional
I don't want to offend
practice.
anyone.
That's
so.
right. It's a practice. And Jeanette put a great resource in the chat that's on our website that Dr. Mitchell uses as well. And that's a good reminder too of when and how to use it if you choose to. But again, optional. But we do know, to James' point, our transgender students are here. They are also our employees. We have transgender employees. It's not our role or responsibility to out them or know who they are, but make a space and an environment that is available, welcoming, and braver for people to be their full authentic selves. So Alejandro, and then I'll move us on to the next slide.
Yeah, I know that we're running short on time, so I want to keep it short. I just want to say, working in education, I think it's better to be proactive than reactive sometimes. And giving the opportunity to share pronouns beforehand might be better. Just as a queer man, I'm kind of debating between my gender, my non-binary status. And I feel like giving that opportunity to share beforehand, I think is really great, and also builds community and connections to other students that may not happen otherwise, right? So that's just my perspective. I also want to reiterate what Claire said about just being mindful of the language. I had this conversation with another colleague who said that using they, them is unnatural, that technically, linguistically speaking, it's not appropriate to use. And to me, that really was off-putting. Even though I understood where he was coming from, I think using that word unnatural kind of devaluated my experiences as a queer man. So I just want to put it there as my perspective.
Yeah, thank you, Alejandro, for sharing your personal experience and your perspective. And I think you're onto something there too, with doing some pre-work in your class and having it happen not publicly and not as part of maybe the verbal intro, because that could then set up a scenario where it's more harmful language or harmful than helpful. And then in one-on-one conversation, be willing to take a risk. And to your point, Alejandro, you took a risk and shared why that term made you feel uneasy and was harmful and has caused harm and violence against community members who identify as LGBTQ trans. And I think if we think about the continuum of homophobia or racism or sexism, I want to situate here that it may be an interpersonal interaction or a joke that was not meant to be funny. But I want you to know that that is part of the continuum that goes all the way to the end of the continuum, which is murder. Because when we dehumanize at the very local level or discount and dehumanize, those things add up culturally to a practice that can be harmful and cause hate crimes and violence against community members. Not me as an individual participating, but to recognize that hate is on a continuum and forms of oppression and the isms are on a continuum. And what we're really trying to introduce here is that all of them have an impact and an intent, and to be aware, because we want to either be proactive or reactive, to your point, Alejandro. So I really appreciate your comments. Let me go back here to the slides and share then the image of how forms of oppression show up in this lens of in this interlocking circles here. So we've talked already. We're not going to get to the case scenario because each of you have already shared really great examples, from the recent closure decision from a district to individual interaction with a person who used terminology that was hurtful, to having a conversation in your office area or the recent training you were at, or introducing concepts in your classroom. You've all shared really good examples. When we think about the system of oppression, the reason the structure, to Alex and James' earlier point, the reason the structure is able to operate and continue to be the body that holds advantages, disadvantages, is because the ways in which we've been conditioned on the individual level and our interpersonal connections with, or interpersonal relationship with others. So if we look at this side of the circle here, and this comes from the National Equity Project, which is a good resource if you haven't visited their website. It's a great resource. This comes from them. And in my definition document of power and privilege and difference, the Teaching and Diversity and Social Justice book unpacks this a little further with thinking about, on an individual level, we have personal beliefs and actions that may serve to perpetuate or dismantle oppression, just depending on where we are in our understanding. And these can be conscious and unconscious, externalized or internalized. So on an individual level, I may, really believe that I want to support my friends who are women of color in particular, Black women, but I may fall short in an unconscious way by upholding a stereotype or a bias that is harmful to my Black friend that I'm not aware of until she tells me or pays attention. And so then in that interpersonal interaction between two people, let's say my friend Sharon and I have this interaction, and she's like, Claire, yeah, the term you just used, not cool. It's so out of date. And I can share this with you because we're neighbors, we're friends, we go on walks. And I just want to tell you that terminology really does more harm than good. As her friend and as an ally or as a person in solidarity, I'll be able to take in her feedback and say, oh my gosh, my mistake. I did not realize that term was outdated or antiquated and harmful to you. I will do better. Thank you for letting me know. I'm sorry, and I won't use the term again. Or how can I improve? But really it'd be stop using that term. And I have to think about, where did I learn that term? Well, maybe it was institutionalized in media. And if my only experience of a particular type of a Black woman is from a TV show, and I adopt some stereotype, then of course that is where the interpersonal individual is going to collide or connect there. And then structurally, we can look at the ways it shows up across institutions. So media, or parts that Black women play, and are they stereotypical? Are they wearing animal prints, and are they objectified? Like, there's lots of ways in which the media as an institution upholds structural racism against Black women. And I have a responsibility now that I know, and my friend told me, to really think more critically about the ways in which I take a look at media images or magazine pictures, et cetera, et cetera. So that's just a snapshot and an example of how the lens of a system of oppression can interlock and be connected to an interaction you may have with a friend or colleague. The next slides were about how to interrupt. So I'm going to close with these and then offer to stay on a little longer if you want to have more conversation or questions or concerns about anything raised here. And this document and this document are further unpacked here with the further definitions and explanation of the 4 levels or the interlocking circles I just shared. I have 4 levels here, but the National Equity Project shows the 3, which is individual, interpersonal, and institutional, and structural. Cultural is informed by those institutional beliefs and structure. And so they're nuanced in some ways, but very similar. And so this document supports further unpacking that image. Let me just check here, and then I will make them available. I'm going to send out to you all the PowerPoint and these 2 definition Word documents, if that's okay. We didn't get to the scenario, but like I said, there's plenty in what you shared already that get at understanding how these show up. And so one of the questions was, as a system, what can we do? And to just be mindful that interruptions are going to be in the context of safety, of your own position and your own access to power, social power. Like, I don't want to put you or communities at risk to go up and start interrupting and getting in harm's way if you don't need to. That's not what this is. This is about giving us some tools and language and action items to be able to interrupt. And so what are interruptions? And this is a way to just kind of unpack what we mean, or what I mean by interruptions. They're actions that you can take with purpose to start a dialogue, to be able to have a conversation about language. And Alejandro described your example of talking to a coworker. And then another way to interrupt is to think about how often, have your family members said something and you weren't sure what to do. Coming off the holidays, like maybe there were conversations that were just sort of shut down real quickly, or maybe you avoided engaging with family for your own sort of personal boundaries and health and wellness, to not have to engage in some of the conversations or comments that are offensive. So these are some ways to come up with interruptions for yourself that help you set personal or professional boundaries, depending on your social identity and threshold for risk taking, to engage or not engage, because it is important to be safe. We don't want to have people confronting in a way that is not supportive. So this is meant to provide some guiding principles here. Any questions about oppression or interrupting? Where I was going was about the system. So individuals make up the system. Interpersonal relationships also kind of reinforce the structure or the system. Once we have an understanding that it's not our fault, and that when we look at understanding oppression that affects all of us, white and people of color, men and women, we'll have an opportunity to move on the cycle or circle of oppression, to be able to step in and out of different situations feeling more prepared to have a conversation. It's really not about dominating one point of view. It's about being able to make space for lots of different lived experiences and points of view, and recognize that if there is that community collective response, then there's going to be room in the structure and the system for more ways to address. Does that make sense? That right now there's one way to address things, and it seems like a battle of convincing people to do it my way or their way. And that's not what this is describing. This is describing that there's a variety of actions we can take, and we make up the system to change it and make room for, to use language, other default settings or other ways of introducing information, and that there's not only one right or wrong way. So I want to just take off the judgment of what this introduced, and that there's not one way to do it, that there's a variety of perspectives. And what we want to pay attention to is if our perspective is coming from a dominant perspective that's meant to cause harm or help open the structure and the system to be more inclusive of other ways of responding. And here's an opportunity to think about, if a comment is made, or if you hear a joke, a sexist joke, you can ask questions, you can check assumptions, you can give more context. And then there's also more training we can get by hosting the Right to Be, which was formerly Hollaback, that does bystander training to stop harassment. They do bystander training to stop harassment against anti-Asian hate and anti-Semitism and anti-racism, et cetera. So that might be something that we think about maybe doing as a follow-up or part 2 to support more tools and resources. And then let me just move here to some guidelines for thinking about interrupting. This all comes from an important place of understanding that we're in a learning community together, not only in this Zoom meeting, but also in our college environment, and that we want to enter into conversations or ways of interrupting, thinking well of one another, not with malicious intent, and to demonstrate that this is a practice and that it takes time. We have to make mistakes before we can learn or grow. Kind of know your objective for going into the conversation with your peer or colleague, share new information, take responsibility, be aware of your own use of nonverbal communication, engage, be willing to commit to engaging in dialogue and follow up, because we know each other, we're going to see each other again. What we experienced here, it might have residual. We may want to come back to it. So invite each other to be able, when you see each other next time, or set up a time to see each other, have more conversation, and to follow your intuition and instinct, and always feel like we can be interruptible, that there's always opportunity to make mistakes and learn and grow, and that there isn't a one size fits all to how we unpack or engage around individual, interpersonal, institutional, and structural or cultural oppression. I think if it was cleaner and if it was easier, we would have addressed this much longer ago, and we haven't yet. So it is taking many of us an intergenerational approach to further problem solve and use skills and strategies to change forms of oppression. I wanted to just look here that these are also skills that you'll develop or take on. If you're not uncomfortable, then you might not be at the cusp of growth yet. Because, when we're learning a new concept in math or in human sexuality or in history, whatever discipline that we're taking up or learning, there's some discomfort and sometimes frustration, and a fight or flight or freeze feeling comes in. Pay attention to that and think about what is happening for me right now. Why is this so uncomfortable? And then think about that in the context of growth mindset or just strength-based, that maybe there's something new there to pay attention to that hasn't been resolved yet. And so I think that's where it's important to be able to be open to discomfort, because that is the cusp of change and growth. And when we think about, well, then why would the privileged group then experience the stereotype? That's what came up from you earlier, James. It's like, isn't that then kind of oppressive or opposite to what we're trying to do for all groups? When we think about access and resources and equality, everyone gets the same, and equity, everyone gets what they need, and diversity is who we are, we have to be willing, as the folks on the privileged side, we have to be willing to give up something or share power. And when that happens, the dopamine and then the physical experience and the gratitude would hopefully then be what sustains us on recognizing that your neighbor is able to get the same access and the same resources, if not more, that they need, because they didn't start with the same. And so as a privileged person on some of those identities, for example, as a straight cisgender woman, using she, her is helpful. Also recognizing that marriage of a man and a woman is not the norm is a way of demonstrating power. Choosing not to be part of the marriage, the institution of marriage, is a political stand against the ways in which same-sex marriage has been used against communities. And so I think about, if you are in a position of power based on gender, race, age, sexual orientation, what is it you're willing to give up and stand shoulder to shoulder with community members who don't have the same privilege and power as you do? What are you willing to give up? And what are you willing to gain? So I just want us to think about it in that way, that when we're thinking about equity, it is not the same. Some are going to get things that you may not get or I may not get. And it's partly because I have unearned access. And so when we think about this section here of solidarity, it's talk and action. It's listening. It's opening the door, creating space. It's being willing to take a look at hard truths and being engaged in conflict, but recognizing it's all worth it in the end when everyone has the access and the resources to reach their fullest potential. That it's beyond just pulling themselves up by their bootstraps and hard work. It's beyond that. It's structural too. I know we covered a lot of ground. I'm so impressed by our intense, small and mighty group here. We covered a great deal of ground. This is not the end all be all. We will come back to concepts here, and I'll make this information available, and my apologies for keeping us over. 11 minutes. But thank you so much. There'll be probably an evaluation later. This is ongoing, so if I can answer any questions or take up a part 2 together with you or your department or your area, happy to do that. And I wish we did have more time together, but I hope that there are some takeaways here that you'll be able to, sort of marinate on a little bit and maybe think differently about or support the work that you're already doing, and hope that we'll continue to be in a community of practitioners this semester. Thank you so much.